back again. It's Devin and Nick again with our good friend and guest Benny. Today we were talking about the
Hey.
Protestant Reformation, which is in between, or it's like the thing that set off the Protestantism. That's not actually a word. I tried to look it up and it wasn't a thing.
Protestantism.
Yeah, I tried to type in Protestantism today and it didn't work. So go
So,
ahead. Yeah.
no, please, you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, most of my research today was the history of it. I have had some personal experience with three different Protestant denominations, so I can do personal experience for like the rituals and stuff.
So, to kind of help out a little bit to anybody who's listening, from my
Mm-hmm.
understanding, and I think this is a good understanding, but of course, as always, please correct me if I'm wrong. Protestantism, the Protestants, is basically it's like the American version. It wasn't originally American, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
here in America, if you're talking about a religious Christian group and they're not Catholics, then they're Protestants. There's different denominations of Protestants, but because they're the ones who split off from the Catholic Church in the 16th century, correct?
More or less.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, obviously, there's going to be outliers and stuff like that, but like, so if you're talking about people like Southern Baptists or stuff, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about
That's
Protestants.
the denomination of Protestantism. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because the reason is because, so basically, what we understand today as Christianity in the kind of modern non Catholic sense, that is all Protestant. So,
Oh.
getting to heaven through Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
um, like exclusively through Jesus Christ. Because remember, back in the day, there were like indulgences and stuff like that, and there were ways around it. Getting to heaven exclusively through Jesus Christ, kind of a more Protestant deal. Um, there's the acts of love and kind of what that the acts of love and kindness going further than acts of financial, donating to the church or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Denouncing the Pope was a huge one, and the Pope's authority was something that Martin Luther was super into, and it got him declared a heretic, which is always good times. And and so kind of things like that. So just basically just denouncing a lot of the Catholic ideas, and the reason was it was many, but it was basically because of greed. The Catholic greed, the greed of the Catholic Church. I think I read a quote that says something along the lines of, if the Pope is the most rich man like on the continent, so why doesn't he build new churches with his money instead of the
Mm-hmm.
money of his poor followers? That kind of thing. So it seemed like Martin Luther, who kind of kicked off the Protestant Reformation, although he wasn't the first who said that the Pope and the Catholics were crazy. He was just kind of the most notable, to my knowledge. Benny?
Yeah. Say it was like to a Protestant. It basically the way I like to sum up Protestantism is how when we talked about Catholicism, you had like the Bible, but then you also had the Pope, and you had the liturgy, and then you had all these
Mm-hmm.
things that are considered authoritative. Oh my gosh, I can't English today. Authoritative. In Protestantism, the only thing that is considered authoritative is the Bible, right?
Yes.
So there
Mm-hmm.
are there are a lot of rituals and there are a lot of things that different denominations of Protestantism do, but at the end of the day, it's the Bible, and then you know, um, so there's a lot of things um, that in regards to like church governance and polity that different denominations kind of write their own handbook. So like I'm Presbyterian, and in Presbyterianism we have this thing called the Book of Order, and the Book of Order, it's not divinely inspired, but it attempts, it tries its best to form a church governance in accordance to the Bible. Now, the more idiosyncratic things about the Book of Order, are just things that people thought would be a good idea, and it's been around for hundreds of years. But as far as like divine authority, it's only the Bible, and there are
So
a lot of creeds. Um, but the purpose of creeds and liturgy in the Protestant tradition is to kind of guide us and remind us back to the Bible. But in and of themselves, they don't hold divine authority. I don't know if
another
that
thing
makes
that the
sense.
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I saw that I really liked about the Protestant ideals was actually the idea of cutting out the middleman. So,
Right.
like in Catholicism, you have to have like this. You have this like you got the Pope, and then you got all the people under the Pope, and that's kind of like the authority that you've got to go through in order
Mm-hmm.
to, for lack of a better term, get to God. The Protestant ideal, as far as I could tell, is every person is kind of their own, religious authority, and it's their responsibility to do the correct things that they need to do in order to reach heaven or God or what have you. Uh, which I think is wonderful. I think it's great. It gives power back to the people,
I
which
think
is
that's one of the reasons why Protestantism really flourished in America is because it is this sense of individual priesthood, and that's even talked about in First Peter. Each one of us as believers is a priest. Um, so, and it's very interesting because in John, the book of John, the Bible says that Jesus came when we accept Christ, he comes and lives in us. So in the original Greek, that word for lives is the same word that is used for tabernacle, as in a reference to the Old Testament. So Jesus comes and tabernacles inside of us. And so that is the idea that there is no middleman, so to speak. And that's one of the things that I never quite understood about Catholicism is the need for saints, where we have
power.
the ultimate mediator. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't want to be hypercritical about the Catholic system. I just personally something I never quite understood.
Okay. So, before we go any further, I do want to get into a little bit of statistics. As
Okay.
always with statistics, please keep in mind that it's very hard to find completely up to date as of yesterday's statistics. So we're always working with the margin of error when it comes to statistics. So please keep that in mind and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it. So worldwide, 35% of all Christians are estimated to be Protestants. In the USA, 48.9 of all Christians percent of or around that is estimated to be Protestant. 12% of European Christians are estimated to be Protestant. And there are a lot of places where Protestants kind of rule the roost. And some of those include Nordic countries. Germany is one of them, the Netherlands, and Hungary. So, obviously, a lot of European areas, being that this is where a lot of this popped off. Um, and some of them, Protestants have actually kind of been overtaken again by Catholicism. But so that's kind of the worldwide statistics of what we're looking at. I must admit, not exactly as much as I thought it would be, being that Catholicism has been kind of ringing the bells of like of doom for a while now when it comes to their numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and also being that I'm American and almost every religious person that I've met in America has been some form of Protestant, with one or two really great exceptions who were Catholic. So, or what they call Reformed Catholic, jokingly. So, that's kind of what we're looking at. It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And I think it can be really very well argued that America itself was formed on Protestant kind of, on some Protestant principles. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about all day, and I don't know if we should, but we could talk about whether how much of an influence on the founding of America religion had in the first place. But I can say that those dudes were running from the church, so
Yeah, that's
they,
that's what America was founded on. Was people were leaving because they were being persecuted, and it was mostly Protestants, especially in the South here, where I live here in Atlanta. Um, I know from my friend who is Catholic, or my source who is Catholic, who told me when they first moved here, there was like two Catholic churches, and then of course you had a thousand Baptist churches. So I mean, that's even in recent years. That was like 20, 30 years ago.
yeah.
So
I mean,
and
you're not
yeah,
seeing a lot of Catholics in the South at all.
Yeah,
no,
not in
and they
the
were all
particular
forced up north
South.
at the beginning, but it was United States was founded settled by Protestants mostly because they were running from the church. Again, they
Yeah,
wanted,
from
yeah,
the Protestant church at that. Like there were
interesting.
Protestants running from other Protestants.
Hmm.
So I'm
Or
gonna have a.
if I remember correctly, anyway.
I thought I always thought it was the Catholic Church.
It might have been because I think Mary Queen of Scots was a Catholic.
Hmm.
Um, you could be right. You could be right.
Well, I mean, because the Catholic Church was tied in with the crown, and you
On and
know,
off.
huh?
So, well, yeah, to some extent. So England has an interesting religious history. Um, so there's been times where the king has been Protestants, but then they come back around and oh, now they're Catholic. So the crown itself during that period of time has kind of flipped. Because remember, Henry VIII, he wanted a divorce, but they wouldn't let him, so he created his own
Yes.
Yeah,
church,
he
which
had
is
his
where
own
the
one.
Anglican Church comes from. And then he was a Protestant, you could call it, I guess. And then King James was a Protestant. No, wait, don't quote me on that one. I don't quite remember. I know Mary was. Mary Queen of Scots was legit a Catholic, and she was the one. Bloody Mary
Mm.
is where we get that from. So it could have been. Could have
Little
been,
bit
but
of an aside. Have you guys ever done the Bloody Mary mirror thing? Just saying.
I've never done it.
No.
Me neither. I don't have enough. I don't. My cojones aren't big enough. I'm scared. I'm like completely serious. I'm absolutely terrified of
Oh,
mirrors.
okay.
I mean,
Mirrors.
if you had my face, you'd be terrified of mirrors too.
Oh
Okay,
my
I'm just
Amen,
gosh.
saying.
brother. Me
Nah.
too.
Okay. I'm gonna give a little bit, if it's okay, I'm gonna give a little bit of a idea of kind of some of the history of this, and then I'm gonna have you guys who are really smart go into a little bit more in depth on it. But I kind of wanted to do an overview. Um, basically, uh, basically, it originated with the Protestant Reformation, which Nick will be talking about. This happened in the 16th century. It was a political challenge to the Catholic Church, to the Vatican, and to the authority of the Pope. Now, something that I think should be obvious, but I'll state it anyway. Back in the day, if there was one person you didn't want to make angry, it was the Pope. Okay, you like, even like the king is like okay, but like the pope is like the guy you do not want to come after. So that's so Martin Luther obviously, probably, I'm gonna guess that Martin Luther probably would look in the mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times. Very courageous human. So it kind of popped off with the 95 Thesis,
Mm.
which is something that Martin Luther wrote and distributed. And I have it in front of me. It's very interesting. We'll go a little bit more into it a little bit later. But what it did was it basically made him a target. It was a list of theses that were basically why Catholicism was wrong and why the Pope was not the ultimate religious authority. And it was distributed and, printed and everything else. And what ends up happening is people start catching on to it like fire. Like they're reading it, they're checking it out, and the Vatican has to react to it. And so the
Mm-hmm.
way they react, it was something called the Edict of Worms. The Edict of Worms was very interesting, where basically they it was a decree. I have it actually in front of me. It was issued on 25 May 1521 by Emperor Charles V. And what he said is, for this reason, we forbid anyone from this time forever forward to dare, either by words or deeds, to receive, defend, sustain, or favor the said Martin Luther. On the contrary, we want him to be apprehended and punished as a notorious heretic, as he deserves, to be brought personally before us, or to be securely guarded until those who have captured him inform us, whereupon we will order the appropriate manner of proceeding against the said Luther. Those who help in his capture will be rewarded generously for their good works. So basically, it made him public enemy number one. But it did spark a religious revolution. And because back in the day, the Catholic Church was just not who you were playing with. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're so powerful.
I
Even
got
today, people still get in trouble for saying things against the Catholic, for against saying in the Vatican in Europe. People go to prison for saying things against the
Oh,
Pope.
weird.
really.
Yeah,
Where at? You know?
there was the specific one that I'm thinking of right now actually was featured on the Penn and Teller show BS. I don't want to say the actual word on here, but it's
Mm.
BS. And it was an Italian comedian who basically said, basically had a thing where she was like, like the Pope, he's like so old and all that stuff, and she's making fun of the Pope publicly. And dude, she got in prison for it.
Or
So,
why?
Oh
Really
wow.
and then
interesting.
don't forget, even in America, Sinead O'Connor got in a lot of trouble when she ripped up a picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live.
Oh yeah, I
Like
heard about that.
the I don't think she was jailed or anything like that, but because I don't know, Sinead O'Connor might be an Irish citizen. I don't even know if she's American.
Sounds
But
Irish.
huh?
No,
What?
the name O'Connor. It sounds Irish. Like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think she might be an Irish citizen, but
Mm.
I could be incorrect on that, so please don't quote me on it. But so the even today, the tendrils of the Catholic Church extend very, very far. But back in the day, around the 16th century, the 1500s, and all that, they it was absolute. Their power was absolute. Like I'm telling you, that I didn't know very much before researching this about Martin Luther, but Martin Luther seriously has to have just guts of steel, like to do that. And so, if you guys would be kind enough to kind of go a little bit more into it, it would be appreciated.
it got to the point where his own friends had to kidnap him to keep him safe. I don't know if you knew that or not. His own
I
buddies,
I didn't
yeah,
know
his
that.
own
What
buddies
into
one
it?
day just yeah, because they were persecuting him, and so one day his buddies just legit kidnapped him. He didn't even know they kidnapped him, and they put him somewhere else to keep him safe. And when he was there, he translated the Bible into German, which was like super found again. Like that was a big no no.
Why?
And even because it wasn't until Vatican II, which is a big conference that they had in the 50s, last century, that you could perform the mass in vernacular and you could actually print
Mm-hmm.
the Bibles in a language other than Latin. And that's when Protestants officially stopped being heretics in the eyes of the church. I mean, for the longest time, like after the Protestant Reformation, during the Age of Enlightenment, stopped having such a harsh view on Protestants. And it wasn't until Vatican II in the 50s where they were like, okay, they're no longer heretics. Um, so that was very interesting. And but up to before Vatican II, all masses have to be done in Latin. You couldn't hold a mass in a language other than Latin. You couldn't have a Bible, a Catholic official Catholic Bible, other than in Latin. And so it was a big deal for Martin Luther and Wycliffe and Tyndale, um, to translate Bibles in languages that was not Latin. So
Yeah, that
that
was
was a
my
big
next
deal
question: is why did he choose German as the
because
language?
because it was the vernacular that he knew. It was the language
Mm, that's
that
where. Yeah.
yeah. He lived in Germany. All that went like Wittenberg and Burns. All that went down in Germany, and it spread because so his friends hit him. And remember, like we talked before the podcast, like he never wanted to leave the Catholic Church. Like he was like, hey, we could change things. These are 95 things that we need to change, but we're still the Catholic Church. But it just didn't catch on. So people started doing their own things, like Calvin and Knox and Scotland, two of my favorite reformers. That's why it was in German, and then eventually people started just translating the Bible, and that's why you have like the Wycliffe Bible translators. He was famous. I want to say that it was either Wycliffe or Tyndale that translated the Bible um, into English. The first Bible that was ever translated into that to eventually it wasn't the English that we speak today. I think it was like Middle English or something,
Yeah, it was like
and then it
1611.
evolved.
You get that if you
Yeah,
get a 1611 Bible. I've seen it. It's
you wouldn't
rough.
be able to read it.
No.
You could not read it.
No.
That's something. So let me get on my soapbox real quick about the King James.
Uh,
So
God.
the King James Bible, the 16, it's called the 1611 because that's the year that it was completed.
Mm-hmm.
But um, most if you go to Walmart today and you pick up a copy of the King James and you read it, you're actually reading I can't remember the year, the 1840 something Oxford edition or revision
Mm-hmm.
is what it's called. So you're really reading 19th century English, not 1600 English. So that's just my
Mm-hmm.
gripe.
I
But
mean, they
yes,
had to
no, I
do a
mean that,
translation to make it
Mm-hmm.
readable to the most
uh,
people possible.
and
Oh.
oh man, don't get me started about like people who say KJV only, like
Eh,
I get an aneurysm just hearing that. But that's another topic altogether.
See, the thing is
But
like I have nothing against the King James version of the
oh, none at
Bible.
all.
I have everything against King James as a human, and I think King James was a shitty. Sorry, I'm
Edit that out.
sorry, guys. Excuse my language. It had to happen eventually.
oh,
Okay,
okay.
come on. Why did that have to be me? I think King James was a terrible human, and I
Mm,
think that in a lot of ways, the way he lived his life was a pathetic and fearful life. And
Probably.
we'll
it's been
get
a minute since I
further
really
into.
talked, since I really looked into King James as a human. But
I
I'm
haven't
glad
either.
you did bring up the Bible because there is a certain thing with Protestants. Their Bible is different than the Catholic Bible. In the Catholic Bible, they kept 5 Old Testament books. I got to bring up their names again.
Apocrypha.
Yes, the Apocrypha is what we call it, or as what Protestants call it.
So,
But yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, interestingly enough, the OG King James had the Apocrypha in it, and
Oh,
yeah, the
Why'd they take
original.
it out?
they're
Because
not. They don't contribute to the overall. I don't want to say story, but they don't contribute to the overall. Yeah, the story of Christ. That's what the whole Bible is all about. Is the story of Jesus, and these are just books of teaching and knowledge. So the Protestant Church still believes they're good for teaching, but they don't contribute to the overall story of
well,
Christ.
I was about
From
to
what I
say,
know.
God forbid we have stories of teaching and knowledge in the Bible. That's
but what it
ugh.
really what it is, so like I said, the King James had the Apocrypha, and the original ASV, the American Standard Version, had the Apocrypha in it, which at that point was like a big whoa, because that was beginning to be like a Bible that a lot of Protestants uses. But the reason why the Apocrypha is not the reason why Protestants don't consider it divine is because um we just don't find it to be divinely inspired. Now, and Jerome, I believe Jerome was translating the Bible into Latin from the original language, the Vulgate. When he was writing the Vulgate, he acknowledged the fact that First, Second Maccabees, and all these other Bibles, for
Mm-hmm.
First, Second Maccabees, for example, is a historically accurate account of what happened to the Maccabees. Right? It's a historically accurate account that those things actually happened, but it's those books are not considered divinely inspired by the Protestant Church, because there's this whole process that um, those books went to create the canon of Scripture. So basically, the way I like to explain it is the canon of Scripture that we have now, the 66 books that we have in the Protestant Bible, um, were found to be in accordance with each other by the oh my gosh, I forgot the name of the council. I think it was Trent, but I think that was the Catholic one. Might have been Nicaea. I can't remember. Anyway, so a lot of guys got together and said, "Hey, let's find all. We have all these manuscripts. Let's find the ones that are considered that we would consider divine, or are in accordance with each other. All the ones that
Mm-hmm.
do not contradict each other." And so they found that what we would call the apocrypha, uh, maybe not necessarily contradicted the other 66, but there were a lot of things that didn't line up, a lot of inconsistencies.
That's also when
Mm.
the Gnostic text was deemed non-canonical as well. Correct?
Yes, so the Gnostic texts are interesting because the Gnostic text in the timeline of Bible translation, or of the biblical canon, the Gnostic texts start appearing a lot, sometimes even hundreds of years after the last book is considered to be written, which is Revelation.
Well, I mean,
And there's just
even the New Testament stories that we accept as canonical today were written very, very long after Jesus had already. I mean, it was by far not something that was written while it was happening or even close to it.
certainly
So, huh?
no, yeah, no, I agree with you, but
Mm-hmm.
Mark, Luke, and John, and by that same logic, the rest of the books of the Scripture agree with each other on the overall themes. Now, there are books that there are accounts of Jesus' story that are, sometimes found in one book but not the other. That's fine, but the four books don't contradict each other in the message that is trying to that God is telling us. So, for example, the way Judas died. I believe Mark says he hung himself, and I believe Luke says he tripped and died. He fell off a cliff.
Mm.
I could be wrong on which book says which one, but it's two different accounts of how he died. So what the early church, well, really not even the early church, I guess like the first or second century church, they determined that while that detail it's not the gospels don't agree, the overall message is that Judas died.
Yeah, he was a betrayer
And
and he
yeah,
died.
and those books agree with each other in the overall meta narrative, whereas the synoptic gospels, there's a lot of things in there that just don't agree with what we would consider the canon.
Another fun fact about the New
Mm.
Testament is that it's almost certain. I think maybe with the exception of Luke, maybe it's almost certain that the people they're named after didn't write them, which is interesting from a historical standpoint. It's
Really?
almost certain. Yes, absolutely. We can look more into this if you want
Yeah.
to, and
Mm.
kind of because I don't want to spread misinformation, but my understanding is that, like I said, with the exception of maybe Luke, all of them are written by other people. Um, and
Hmm.
so they're definitely not written by the people named.
Oh, Mark,
Yeah,
I
Mark
think
was
scholar.
he was a an apprentice or a follower of Simon Peter, I believe.
Yeah.
And so
So that's why
it's actually the book of Peter, really, because it's his
account.
accounts, but Mark wrote it.
Yeah. Thing.
It's
Same thing.
I think I think a very interesting subject that I mean we could probably do an entire cast on actually is the nature of canon in regards to the biblical sense, because I think a lot of people out there might not know. We're sitting here talking about the Gnostic text. Oh, we're talking about the Apocryphica. That word kills me. We're talking about that. We haven't got into like the Dead Sea Scrolls or anything like that, but none of that stuff's considered canon because of the convention that Benny referenced earlier. But it's fascinating because there was a process, there was reasons that Benny outlined, and those are correct reasons for why those books that were in many cases written in the same time frame as the actual biblical books that we consider canon today were written, and they were kind of ejected for whatever reasons. And I find that just incredibly, I think it's a great subject, an incredibly fascinating one, and one that
Definitely.
can be informative. But Benny, I actually, Nick and Benny, I had a question for both of you, but specifically piggybacking off something that Benny said earlier, which is that you said you get annoyed when people say King James version only, or that that's the best version. Gentlemen, what would you believe if our listeners wanted to go read up on some of this stuff, they wanted to take a crack at the Bible, which by the way, I recommend to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
religious or not, read the Bible. You need to read the Bible. It's the most important book in our history, bar none. What version of the Bible do they need to read in order to, in your opinion, in order to get the best idea of the history of this religion and the history of that's outlined in the Bible?
So let me clarify when I say that
Mm-hmm.
people say KJV only. So it's fine to think that the King James version is the best version, right? Like that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is there are people out there who say that, and I've met some of those people who that they will argue that you should not read anything but the King James version.
Yeah,
That,
I know people like that.
yeah, that's the notion that I think is incorrect. I mean, it's fine if you're like, I only read the King James because I just. Some people love reading the King James because it has that. Um, like if you read a lot of the poetry books in the King James, it has this. It flows very beautiful, because of the way English is the these and the thous and the way it flows. Some people really love that. So I mean, it's. But I personally use two versions. I use the English Standard Version, the ESV,
That's what I was gonna
and
say.
Yeah, I use that one, and I use the NIV.
Dang it, that's the other one I was gonna
Yeah,
say.
so those are the 1994 NIV is the most sold Bible in the world. Just fun fact. And I think those are really really solid Bibles.
Mm-hmm.
I would personally stray away. So there's a lot of Bibles that are um more of a paraphrase and more of a thought for thought, and I'm not trying to
Yeah.
like shame them, but like for example, like the New Living
I
Translation,
was
the
just about
NLT.
to say that one too. The NLT. That one's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's supposed to be hip and modern pretty much. Uh, it's more
Oh, it's one of the
contemporary
ones that
language.
they kind of made it into like modern day English.
Yeah, the
But
English standard is kind of like that, but it's a literal translation from the Greek and Hebrew into more contemporary English. It's not like it's not like 2010 speak though.
I think it was published in 2001. So it's a solid. I think it's a very solid version. Like I said, I like the NIV. The New King James, it's really good. A lot of people like the NASV. So there's a plethora of Bible translations out there um, that you can get to, but the more accessible ones, like I said, NIV, ESV,
Mm-hmm.
um,
If you
they're,
go to
they're,
like
they're
a used bookstore, you could find a Catholic Bible too. I'm not sure if you can just buy those ones out on the shelves. I'm not sure about that one because the way the Catholic Church works, you have your sacraments. I don't know if it's too holy or something to just get the Catholic Bible, but I know you can get them resale. There's a place in Chattanooga where you can go get one.
yeah.
Shout out
So
to McKay.
that yeah, that's what
that's
I
a
would. That's
Just
that's a
yeah, but that one's
very
Yeah,
interesting
it's
information.
very different. The Catholic Bible. The source that I know that is Catholic sent me a picture of their Bible, and it's got the five in the Old Testament that are different.
yeah. The New Testament Apocrypha.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot that come out recently, but we strayed way far from the Protestant
I will
Reformation there.
just tie it up back to
Yeah.
Protestantism. The Bible's it. That's the only authority that we have.
Yes, that was the big thing that Martin Luther really hit upon back whenever he dramatically nailed his 95 thesis to the door, which is where it went. Everyone who's listening, we can get that misconception out of the way. We talked about this before we went on the podcast, and we talked about it a couple of days ago. But a lot of YouTube channels or like documentaries like to say he dramatically, even the picture I'm using on the video, it's like he's pointing at the thesis like this is what's wrong with the church. This is it, and then like nailed it to the door like it was some big show off. But back in the day, back in the 1500s, that was like your town message board. You would
It's like your newsletter.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's where you'd nail something to the door. You'd look at it and go, "Hey, that's what it is for the week. Cool. Thank you, Bob the door nail guy." And so it's not this big dramatic thing. It's just like this is what Martin Luther thought of what was wrong with the church at the time, and he nailed it to the door. From what I was told by my Catholic source, it was more a war on the Catholic elders and the Pope rather than the whole church as a whole. From what I know, like
Yeah, he didn't
yeah,
hate Catholicism.
he was a
He was
Not at
Catholic,
all.
so he was a
yeah.
Catholic. He wanted to reform the church rather than split, but it
Yeah.
it split. So
And
So
yeah.
speaking of nailing the 95 thesis to the door, if you guys would be so kind, if you guys want to, I have it in front of me. I would love to outline some of the ones that I found interesting.
Oh sure, I can pull them up too.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
should. In fact, you should too, Benny. You should pull them
let's
up.
get it.
I found a good PDF of it, so it's nice and clear. Because if you look at
Hmm.
like the old school versions and the like it's copied off the original,
Yeah.
not exactly
Let's
readable.
see. I can pull it up right.
It is.
Can I pull it up here? There we go. Okay, I got it up on the thing too, on the stream. So if you're watching at home, you can read along if you want.
We're not going to go through all of them.
Yeah, no.
We just
Gosh, that's a whole episode by itself. Maybe I'll do that one on my own. Like I'll read it out to everyone,
I think that
record
would
it.
be cool. I think that would be neat. Uh, let's see. I don't know. Let's start at the beginning. My favorite is, by the way, number 27. If you're reading alone, is my absolutely favorite. Which is, there's no divine authority for preaching that the soul flies out of purgatory immediately. When the money clinks in the bottom of the chest. Martin Luther was way against indulgences. Like he was
Absolutely.
way against that kind of stuff. And so a lot of this, actually, a lot of the 95 Thesis is actually speaking up against the Catholic Church, their tendency, or the Vatican's tendency to hoard money and use their people's money to do stuff like build cathedrals or do whatever they need to do. And so basically, it was like his equivalent of why does a bank essentially charge $35? When you have an overdraft fee, is charging money from people who have no money. When the bank has all the money that they need, is the same
Hmm.
concept that he was saying for the Vatican, which I find very interesting. Uh, God never remits guilt to anyone without at the same time making him humbly submissive to the priest, his representative. Is one of them. There's some interesting ones, guys.
Hmm.
37 to 49 are just savage.
What is
7 to
it?
Yeah.
49.
47, 48, and 49.
Oh,
Oh,
47, 48,
I'm
49.
about to go look. I
I'm
got
jumping right there.
these guys got beef, man. All right, 47 49. Christians should be
Wow.
taught that they purchase indulgences voluntarily or not under obligation. So, okay.
48's a
Uh,
crazy one.
Christians should be taught that in granting indulgences, the Pope has more need and more desire for devout prayer on his own behalf than for ready money. Whoa! Dang. Christians should be taught that the Pope's indulgences are useful only if one does not rely on them, but most harmful if one loses the fear of God through them. That's actually a really good point.
Mm,
That was always like the thing like that I didn't understand about why indulgences were ever legal. It's like, okay, like if I have enough money, I can just do whatever I want and God can never get at me for it. Like,
absolutely not.
I mean, no,
So,
Mm,
with
yeah.
indulgences, right? Like not obviously
yeah,
not in real
Yeah, no,
application.
yeah.
in Protestantism, and the 95 Thesis can be basically summed up in what in Protestantism we call the five solas. So the word sola in Latin means only. And so it's sola gratia, sola fidea, solo Christus, sola scriptura, soli Deo gloria, which means grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, Scripture alone, and only God alone.
Mm,
That's Protestantism in a nutshell.
And I
Not
mean
the Pope, not
today that's Christianity in a nutshell when you're talking about outside of Catholicism.
and
yeah, pretty
outside
much.
Orthodox, the Orthodox churches. So it's basically it's what it is. Only to Christ, only through faith, only Scripture, and only to God be the glory.
Mm,
So no Pope, no intermediary saints, no indulgences, no mass, uh, in the way that Catholic theology is presenting it, and that's what um, Luther was getting at. Sadly, he wasn't. You know, the Reformation didn't catch on because you had all these groups like Calvin, um, who kind of they began to realize that the Catholic Church, it just wasn't going to happen. It just what they realized that they were not going to be able to reform this huge institution. So what they did instead was they started doing their own thing. And so
mm,
the point, I'll say this, and I'll get into a pretty interesting story to show. Um, the point is that the whole point of being a Calvinist, which in and of itself is a doctrine, but at that time, the whole point of being a Calvinist was to not be Catholic. That's how it started. And then you had John Knox in Scotland, who was the father of Presbyterianism. He had the same idea. It's like if we can't reform the church, then let's do our own thing, and that's where Presbyterianism comes from. I'll share this funny story. I think it's funny, but it drives a point. So when I was in college, my first roommate, there was this young lady at my school. I think you knew her, Nick. I'm not gonna say her last name, but her first name is Veronica. and
Pretty
a
sure, yeah.
beautiful young lady. Yeah, beautiful young lady. We got along very well. We are really good friends, and I really liked her a lot, platonically. And my roommate was like, "Hey, man, like you should date her. Like you should talk to her. You should check her out or whatever." She is Catholic, and I was like, David, I can't I can't date Veronica, man. Like it's not happening. He was like, dude, why not? Dude, like nothing against being Catholic, but she's Catholic, and and I'm a Calvinist, and the whole point of being a Calvinist is to not be Catholic. So it's like
Mm,
I can't, and so that's how we got all these denominations.
yeah. It's interesting you bring up dating a Catholic because
Yeah,
I
you're
know
dating
some.
a Catholic.
Oh dang! I was gonna say I know someone who is, but
Oops.
uh, wow. We were supposed to keep it like a secret of what I would be until the very end. It's gonna sleep out anyway. I'm pretty sure everyone knew, but dating a Catholic is hard, but marrying a Catholic if you're not Catholic is extremely difficult. Like when the church split, I guess they had this thing against marrying someone who was a Catholic and you're not. If you're not baptized at all, even outside of Protestant, like if you're a Protestant who's baptized, they can work with you, but it's extremely hard. You have to go to your head
Yeah.
bishop of the area. So if I hypothetically am dating a Catholic and I want to marry her and I'm Protestant who has been baptized, I have to go haul my butt down to the head bishop in Atlanta and ask if it's okay. And they demand that they be raised Catholic and that they go to Catholic church.
Any kids in the situation.
Yes. So
They play
even
hardball with that.
even if I don't convert, I still must raise them Catholic, or they're going to be really upset, and they'll check up on you too. You got to be part of a church, and actively. So it's interesting that they recognize two Catholics being married and two non-Christians being married, but they call it a mixed marriage whenever you are Catholic and Protestant. I had
They
to look into it. Bless you.
Yeah, and
Thank
the
you.
reason why I would like that, like I said, be Catholic. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not saying, hey, don't be Catholic. No, like if that's what you are. That's what you are. But I, because of my religious convictions, and because I'm sure of Veronica's religious convictions, we would have never probably be married.
Mm.
And
No,
I'm obviously, yeah. And it probably wouldn't have been a good idea because it comes down to the wire. Like, well, crap. Like, is she gonna come to my church? Am I gonna go to her church? Like, I don't want to be Catholic, you know. And so, like, oh my gosh, what do you have kids? So
Oh
it's
gosh.
overall, it's a better situation.
I do want to say in this in this case, I'm not going to talk about what I am or what I've had to deal
Mm-hmm.
with as far as this kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
goes,
Mm-hmm.
because I am going to keep mine until
I meant to
um
keep mine till the end.
they actually I was talking to a friend last night who's Catholic, and
Mm.
I was telling him about doing this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, and he was like, "Are you gonna have you like informed like your audience that you're blank?" And I said no. He's like, "Oh, well, it's obvious anyway." So
Oh gosh.
um but no, so check it out. You notice that all of these problems that you guys are talking about as far as this stuff goes is all it's none of it has to do with God. None of it has to do with the actual act of two religious people with slightly different religions getting married and being loving each other and spending their lives together. It all has to do with the structure
Yep.
and the
Yep.
establishment.
Yeah, I
And
agree. So
that's one thing that I I'm like, okay, you know what I mean?
yeah,
But God,
Yeah. That's
this
it's a lot to worry about.
yeah. Well, let me clarify. Let me clarify. There is nothing wrong with marrying a Catholic if you're Protestant, and vice versa, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Like I don't think it from a Protestant point of view, from my point of view, God doesn't frown. God would have not frowned upon me to date Veronica and to marry Veronica and to even have kids with Veronica. Like God, it's not gonna say no. Granted, this is coming from a Protestant point of view. The only thing that I was saying is it's that's something that I was putting on myself, not that God was putting on me. Because of the I was thinking about when you date, you should think about the long term, right? And so that's what I
Yeah.
was like. In the long term, this is not a good idea, not because God says so,
No, no,
but
no, no,
because of
no.
my own personal convictions. Right.
No, thank
I just
God.
wanted to be clear. I
I
just wanted to be
wasn't
Yeah.
clear.
judging.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying that.
Right. Right.
I have personally dated people that had different religious beliefs than me, and it never really becomes an issue until you start talking about children. And so
Oh, true.
when
True.
we talked about kids, this is before Tatiana, before I got married to my beautiful wife that I'm with today. Um, I was with somebody else, and we were talking about kids. Like when you guys just kind of start talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And and so we were talking about it, and she had different religious beliefs than I did. And so she's like, I want to raise the kid with these beliefs. And I'm just like, whoa, hold on. No. I mean, maybe a little bit, but can we like do some kind of fusion? You know what I mean? Like in that situation, it's incredibly difficult. And that has nothing to do with establishment or God. That has everything to do with how you run your relationship. I do find the concept of not dating somebody who otherwise would be suitable because of their religion to be fascinating. Because, like, in my case, like, just my opinion, I think love transcends all of those boundaries. And I think true love has nothing to do with any of that and everything to do with the two individuals involved. And so I do find it interesting that it would be a concept, although that is a decision you have to make for yourself. And I'm not saying it's a
Yeah.
good or a bad one. I'm just saying it is. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I wasn't married, like say if I wasn't married and I walked into Hobby Lobby one day and there was a lovely, lovely woman who, was a different religion than I was. I would date her. I'd marry her. I'd have
Mm-hmm.
kids with her.
Mm-hmm.
We would deal with those problems down the line. Probably unless she was Catholic, because Nick actually went very far into that with me, and holy crap,
It's hard.
that's a difficult situation to find
Mm.
yourself in. But you can handle it because Nick's awesome.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
My girlfriend's Protestant, so well, I mean, she's Protestant,
Still
and
got to choose which church, which denomination.
well, yeah, because she comes to church with me, and I'm Presbyterian. She goes to my Presbyterian church on Sundays, and but she was actually raised Baptist, and so she struggles with that a little bit. But overall, what matters is that you're marrying somebody who has um values than you do.
Mm.
And this is something that translates to Protestantism, because there are so many denominations in Protestantism that a lot of them have the overall same. Most of them, I would say, have the overall same fundamental beliefs, and they just deviate with more
It's just the
idiosyncratic things.
rituals that are different most of the time.
Yeah, and the overall beliefs and the
The overall
church
theology is the
governance.
same.
Yeah, and really, really, when it comes down to it, it's most denominations vary in church governance. Church government is what sets denominations apart, in my opinion. The
Absolutely.
big
I
one,
would say
anyway.
so. Yep, I would say that as well. But since we did talk about Catholicism and now we're talking about Protestants, there is this middle way that I don't remember if we talked about it during the podcast or was it between
We hinted
podcasts.
at it during the podcast. We might
We
have.
Are
did.
you
I
talking
don't
about
remember.
Episcopalians?
The Church of England,
Yeah,
yeah.
my boys did
The
Episcopalian.
Church of England or Episcopalians or was it Anglican is also part of that.
So there is a slight difference. So way a long time ago, I can still remember. Um, so the Anglican Church, the Church of England, was in America, right? And they were known as the Anglicans, right? That's just so. What ended up going down was there was this. You might have heard of this. Little small insignificant. Well, it's not insignificant. You might have heard of this little event called the American Revolution. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when that went down, there was
That
a
little
lot
thing.
of yeah, it only founded a country. So there was a lot of Anglicans who were wanted to be Anglican, but didn't want to call themselves Anglican because the revolution. So they were like, what do we do? So basically, they kept the same polity and the same church governments, governance as the Anglicans, but now they called themselves Episcopalians. So,
Oh, because I was reading the middle way
yeah,
as
yeah.
something else. Something else is the middle
No, no, no.
way.
Well, the middle way,
Yeah, I'm talking
Episcopalians
about
have this thing called the middle way because they,
back in 1534 is what I'm
um,
talking about. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking
yeah.
about.
So the middle way is they are attempting to find the middle way between Protestantism and
Yeah,
Catholicism,
that's
and
what. Yeah.
it's kind of funny because in the grand scheme of it all, they are considered Protestants, um, categorically, but a lot of them would say that they're an in between thing. So it gets a little gray and dicey. It's most a lot of things in Protestantism do as far as denominations go, but that's their big thing. I forgot the Latin phrase for it. The via media. That's what it is in Latin. The middle way.
Mm.
So
The one I was talking about was in the 1500s, when it was King Henry VIII's quest to get a little boy, but the Pope refused
let them divorce, right?
divorce.
Yeah,
So he did his own thing. I think it's the Church of
that's how.
England.
Yep, that's how the Church of England came about to be,
And
which is really
then,
interesting.
okay.
I was gonna say like the early iterations of the Anglican Church back when Henry VIII founded it was pretty much it was the exact same as the Catholic Church, with the exception that you
Hmm.
could divorce.
Yeah.
And later on, it became what we know as the Anglican Church today.
Yep. I would say,
Imagine
okay.
being so annoyed with your wife that you form an entire church just to divorce them.
He had a
I,
couple of them killed.
I did. I'm not. I'm not going to the subject. This particular one. But wow. Okay.
Yeah, it
Cool.
was. Yeah,
Well, divorce is
uh,
preferable.
I'd say
Um,
so probably.
well, like we were, like I told you, off podcast, but one thing the Catholic Church does right, in my opinion, is when you want to marry someone, they make you sit down and do counseling for an entire year, I believe. So you have to sit there,
Really?
and they sit and they ask you like every time, hey, are you sure you want to marry this person? Are you sure you want to marry this person? So like they really want to make sure, because they don't, the Catholic Church doesn't like divorce, obviously. The only time you can really get one is if you break your vows,
I
which
mean,
I
neither
mean,
does the Bible, but you
yeah,
know,
exactly. Um, uh,
really for a whole
that's
year?
the thing that, yeah, I don't remember if it's 6 months or a year. Still, it's a long time, but you have to go to
Yeah, I know that.
counseling together to make sure that you really, really want to marry this person. They really care about that. Um,
And so when you do go through all this and you get done with it and and all the paperwork signed and all the stuff has happened, at that point, can you go to Vegas and get married by Elvis?
oh
I'm
my
just
god,
just
bro,
asking for a friend. Asking
renew
for a
Dude,
friend.
renew the vows there at Vegas. We're renewing our vows.
Oh,
Wow, how long have you guys been married? I don't know, about 5 days.
it happens.
just got to do like the official one, and then after that, you can go get
Go do the goofy one.
go
You can
get
actually,
Elvis.
when you get married in Vegas, do you actually like? Is it legally binding?
Yes,
Yeah, you can go to the
yeah.
courthouse.
That's
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 legally
that's the
Really?
thing,
binding.
my dude. Yes.
You can get,
I know you can go to the. I know you can go to the courthouse, but like you know how in
yeah.
Vegas
I
it's
mean,
like
remember some of our friends that we went to at school? They're um, what you call the word? They're priests for dudism from the Big
oh I
Lebowski,
remember that.
and
Yeah,
some states actually like
recognize that.
recognize dudism. So if you have a dudism priest, you can get married by
This,
some guy.
yeah,
It's just,
no
Well,
for
that's
sure.
one thing I actually love. So, is about being a little bit more religiously fluid. Is that I I have like when I got married, I I told a good friend of mine, Mike. I told him I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna marry Tatiana. Her and I have been talking about it for a while. We're gonna do it." He's like, "All right, give me 15 minutes." He went on. I swear to God, I love it. He went online, got himself a certification, and officiated my wedding.
that's
And it
pretty
was the
cool.
coolest
That's pretty cool.
thing in the world. We had a backyard wedding. and with my friend Mike in a Hawaiian shirt marrying us.
Oh,
And
that's pretty
yeah, it
cool.
was cool, man. It was cool, and I like that. I like that interpretation of wedding where you can do the big, big whole ceremony if you want. You can do the smaller thing,
Hmm.
Yeah.
but basically anybody can officiate that they want.
Oh, not if you're Catholic. It has to be a priest and inside the church.
Oh, I know, I
Yeah.
know. That's why I'm saying this.
Yeah.
I'm not anti that. I
Yeah.
just
And so
I like the
in
fluidity
in
of non.
Protestantism, it's kind of like that. Like so, a Protestant would argue the following. You ready?
Yeah,
A
let's go.
Protestant would say this. A Protestant would say, as far
Hmm.
as the pomp and circumstance of getting married, a Protestant would say the following. Um, let's say you already went to the counseling and this
Hmm.
is the one, right? This is the
Hmm.
one. A Protestant would say, hey, get married however you want to get married.
Hmm.
If
That's
you want
true.
to go and elope to the courthouse and sign the paperwork, and boom, you don't need a fancy ceremony. It doesn't have to be in a church. As long as you actually go about and get a marriage license and sign it, because God orders us to follow our rulers, because he placed them there, right? Unless that there and unless those rulers stand in the way of spreading the gospel. But other than that, hey, obey your rulers, obey the laws. They're there for a reason. So that's what a Protestant would say. That's what I would say. I mean, I want to elope. Go down to the courthouse. You don't have to have fancy wedding. You don't have to have any of that. Really, you don't even have to have counseling,
I
in
mean,
the eyes of God.
do you guys know how much a normal wedding costs?
Don't get me started on
Couple
weddings.
couple
I
grand.
will rant.
Yeah,
I
dude, it's like $20,000 or something for a big wedding. It's like
will rant on weddings.
oh my god, yes. And so like right there with the and I've been to some lovely, beautiful, gigantic weddings that I thought were just gorgeous, but dude, I thought about it. I was like, I can't imagine how much this costs. Like, I am so sorry to these people's bank
Racking up.
accounts, but
Oof.
yeah,
Uh,
it's crazy. Well, the good news about the Catholic version is if you got to get married in the church, then you can't do a lot of that stuff because it's a church thing. So, how much does a Catholic wedding cost, Nick?
No idea. I can look it up.
So
Well,
that's
You
what's
yeah.
you
cool.
better look it up, my dude. You better start saving up, my dude. You
That's
got
what's
a
cool
year.
about yeah. That's what's cool about Protestantism, not just with weddings, but Protestantism, because it has so many denominations. There's more of a variety in the things that you want to do, in the more like idiosyncratic things. So like, for example, I'm Presbyterian, like I said, and my church uh, doesn't really like what I like to call rock and roll. Like, there's nothing wrong with rock and roll church, but my church doesn't do it. Hey, if you want a
Mm.
rock and roll church, go to a rock and roll church. If you want a non rock and roll church, go to a non. If you want a church that only does this, then go to that church. There's more variety in things that are out there. You want a more liturgical church? Hey, go to an Anglican church or like a Methodist church. You want less liturgic? Hey, go to a Baptist church.
Oh, go to
There's
go to
more.
Pentecostal church. There you go. A
Yeah,
charismatic
my parents are
charismatic Church of
Pentecostal.
God. There you go.
So there's more. I don't want. I'll say it. There's more freedom in variety and the things that you can um, get yourself into in Protestantism. Now, I will say, when looking for a church and when looking for a denomination, make sure they're biblically solid, right? You don't want to go to a church where they're preaching heresy, um, and obviously scrutinize everything. Even when you go to a church that you know it's solid, whatever you hear, don't be hypercritical of it. But Paul says, examine everything and retain what's good, because nobody's perfect, no human is perfect, no pastor is perfect. So every pastor is bound to say something that is maybe not correct or
Mm.
something you disagree with. So that's where you have to examine everything and retain what's good.
But also,
Now,
we're
if
talking about within the context of Christianity. So if you're not looking for Christianity,
I
then that's a
right,
different issue. But he's
right,
basically saying understand that priests and people are flawed, even in Christianity, and preachers are flawed. But as long as the overall message is biblically correct and canonically correct, at least, then you're probably going to be looking good as far as the church. Because a lot of churches do preach a lot of stuff that they should not be preaching, which is
yeah.
ridiculous.
Oh man, I've definitely gone to church multiple times. Not the church that I go to now, but I've been to services where The pastor gets up there and they just go on political rants. And if I want political rants, I can go on them myself, or I can watch the TV or the news or whatever. Like, I want to learn about God, and that's now the Bible. Not saying the Bible doesn't call us to be political, because the Bible definitely takes some stances that are political, right? We don't have to go into those, but I've heard pastors just go on partisan politics, and it's just like, oh, come on, man, like, you're killing me here.
Well, the reason is because throughout history, religious leaders have had an inordinate amount of power to influence their followers, their flock, or whatever, to believe as they do, and to
Right,
believe, you know. And so we're talking, when you're talking about somebody getting up there, and I'm not talking about casual, like, um, you know, make sure that you vote in November. I'm going to be voting for such and such, you
right,
know, that kind of thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody who's actually up there trying to wield their religious power in order to influence an outcome as far as their
right.
local area, which
Yeah,
is something that definitely happens.
yeah.
So
That's what I'm saying. Like, partisan politics is where the Bible definitely calls us to take political stances. Like in Romans 13, Paul says, "Hey, obey your local leaders. Pray for your local
Mm.
leaders. Obey them. Submit yourself to them because God put them there." That's political, right? In and
mhm.
of itself, that's very political. Um, and I don't know if I should even bring this up, but like, for example, the topic of abortion, right? That's a big can of worms. We're not gonna open. I'm just saying, you know, where I live, and I personally, um, because I live in the southeast, a lot of Christians believe that we need to take a pro life stance. So if that's what you believe, that's what you believe. I'm not going to get into that. So that's definitely a political stance. So the Bible does calls us to take political stance. Love your enemies. That's political. How the way you handle your finances can be political. The way you worship, just there's a lot of things that have political implications that the Bible does cause us to take a stand on. But I don't partisan politics is where things start to get dicey. Like you said, Devin, like if your pastor gets up there and says, "Hey, you should go out and vote." There's nothing wrong with that. I can get behind that. I don't think the Bible has anything, has that. I don't think that's nothing wrong with that. But if your Bible says, if your pastor gets up there and it's just every other Sunday, it's like, "Hey, you need to vote for candidate so and so, because if you don't vote for candidate so and so, we have a problem." That is where I would draw the line.
Mm.
That is incredibly, incredibly inappropriate. Like I would be incredibly angry if I went to a service and I'm trying to get a little Jesus in my life. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And
Mm.
this is exactly basically what you were saying. I'm just echoing it, but you're just trying to get a little bit of Jesus in your life, trying to get a little bit of education, and instead you're getting that stuff. You know, I would be incredibly angry at that if I had to go through it. Um, yeah. So, and I mean, we also have the issue in America where politics and religion, specifically Christianity, are getting inextricably tied in with each other. It's the lines are blurring more and more every year that goes by, and I'm curious to see where it'll turn out. It's
Mm.
because I believe that those two things should be mutually exclusive personally, but I don't know. It's kind of some
Yeah.
people jumped into bed with some
Yeah.
people, and it just kind of
Yeah,
ended
I
up the way
think they
it did.
should be separated as well, because the more the government becomes into the church, or the church comes into the government, the more they're going to influence each other. And I think there's like an old saying, if you let the nose of the camel in, eventually the whole camel's going to be inside the tent. So eventually, if you let them in a little bit, then I mean, one of them's going to take over the other one. And
And
I
So
think
so
they need to be
what
kept
scares me about
separate.
that is what happens. Well, it's already happened. So let's just go ahead and say that. We don't need to get too deep into this, but I will say that it has already happened where we've had very, very high up religious leaders in America say that certain candidates were selected by God. That has happened very
Mm.
recently. But what happens when they start
on
saying it
both
and
sides
people
of the aisle,
actually
I would say.
well, I'm talking as recently a very specific one.
Mm.
um, but it's there was a summit. There's basically a summit, and they basically declared that. But the thing about it is that as a country, we're pretty secular, So, and also, and I don't mean just like secular as in atheism. I mean secular as in we have our own kind of things that we do religiously and we kind of stay to ourselves with it and we don't really bother anybody else with it. So, one religious authority saying that about a certain candidate does not necessarily mean that everybody in America is going to listen to them or care or believe it. But what happens when we get enough generations down where that's the exact opposite, where somebody says that and it's believed? We're talking about going back into like the Middle Ages. You know what I mean? Like, as far as this one thing goes, like
Yeah.
where a religious authority can ordain essentially a monarch or whatever, you know, and the idea of that happening is incredibly problematic to me. Not because I have anything against anybody believing whatever they want to believe, but because that is not the American way. The
Yeah.
American way is that our leaders are selected by vote. You know what I
Mm,
mean? So who knows?
So yeah,
yeah.
no, I definitely agree. Like I think that our people's ideologies and people's religion affects the way they vote, and that's fine. I just wouldn't hold my breath about my worries about. I'm sorry about your worries because I just don't. As religiosity it's dwindling in the developed world, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So I would rest assured I would sleep
It's,
easy tonight.
I would say, especially
Thank
with
you, Vinny. I
the,
appreciate it.
I would say also that you could rest easy because it's the older generations that would, wow, I'm just, I'm setting myself a target here, but I was going to say, like, it's usually the older generations with that would say those kinds of things because even I, who is or is not part of one of these, isn't going to vote for someone just because they are part of the same religious
Yeah.
organization as me. That's an older person thing. Sure, they may hold the same values as a person, but as if a politician, if they don't strike me as interesting, that would do good for the greater humanity as a whole, I wouldn't vote for them. So, like right now, I'm interested in someone who I'm pretty sure is not Christian, and they're not even the same party as I am, but they make some very interesting points, and I'm gonna keep my eye on them. I vote verse on what a lot of the younger generation. I would pray and hope, and I send out the vibes that they vote based on what they believe as a person, and if they are religious and they are the same religious party, then congratulations. If not, don't vote for them just because they are or are not.
Oh,
Yeah, that's just asking
yeah,
for problems.
Message
it
to all
is.
you youngins out there.
The way I like to put it is the
For,
following. Uh, I
bless
I'll say this. Like as a Christian, my main job as a Christian, my priority is to spread Jesus, right? So that's my main job. I need to be spreading Jesus. I also have political opinions that there's nothing wrong with spreading If you want to spread political opinions, do it. You want to spread Jesus, do it. Don't use one to spread the other, because I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind.
That's not a,
Very,
yeah,
very, very well said.
not a Protestant or a Catholic thing. That's just a
I
that's just a
mean,
thing.
and honestly, that's what I'm saying. Like, hey, if you wanna if you like candidate X, vote for candidate X. But don't tell me that I should vote for candidate X because that's what Jesus would do.
Mm,
That's my
mm-hmm.
piece on that.
All right.
Vote for whoever you want and spread Jesus. Don't don't use one to do the other. That's
Now,
what
if
I
we
would
can
say.
just get this to some of the religious authorities that are really
Oh
high up,
gosh, yeah.
Now, like I
that would be
said,
really cool.
now like I said,
Yeah,
like,
political
like
movement
I said,
within a podcast.
yeah, like I said, your ideology and your religion will affect the way you vote and will affect the way you do politics. Okay,
Yeah, of course.
that
They're tied
right,
together. Yeah.
right. That's just a fact of life. And Justice Scalia said it best. If you look up when they were trying to get him on, well, if you can separate your religion from your profession, we're cool. Like, no, you can't do that. Nobody can do that, right? So yes, your religion and your ideology are going to affect the way you do politics. But like I said, don't use one to influence the other.
And that's something in America that we're struggling with, I think, right now,
I
especially as Nick says with the older generations.
Hmm.
I think we are. I think
Younger
we're
Yeah.
kid, I mean, the kids are like, they're like, yeah, I believe this, whatever. But I also believe that people should have health care. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
Mm.
that's all good. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we're struggling with a lot of the older people who are more old school. The kind of bootstrap idea, you know, and
Yeah.
that's
And
go ahead.
so in churches, no, I mean particularly in Protestant churches, like you have people who are, you know, when you say the word liberal, like a lot of times you refer to somebody who's politically liberal, or like theologically liberal. Like I care more about somebody who is more like theologically orthodox than somebody who's politically conservative, you know, and the other way around, conservatism. Like I care more about the fact that
Yeah.
you have Jesus correct and that you know who the Lord is than who you vote for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wouldn't having a good concept of Jesus heavily influence who you vote for in the first place? Like you can probably identify, because we did say earlier, you did say that they're going to inform each other, which is true, of course.
Right.
But if, in my opinion, and I could be wrong about this, I'm not exactly the most informed person in the world when it comes to some stuff. In my opinion, if you have a really great concept of like Jesus and what Jesus was all about and Jesus' principles, that would automatically bar out three-quarters of candidates automatically.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like when we're talking about
Maybe, yeah.
lecherous, you know, we're talking about people who, and it's not that any candidate needs to abide by any religion,
Yeah.
but the thing about it
No,
is that
definitely.
although it has been stated that the statistical chance of an atheist holding public office if they're publicly atheist is basically nothing. Um,
Interesting.
Something that I find very interesting. But the uh, the thing about, especially in the case of Jesus, and you know, tying it back in with Protestants and with religion in general, is that Jesus's principles were super simple: be a good person, be a good human. I mean,
Yeah.
and the thing is, and the thing that stings about a lot of the world that we live in today is Jesus asking for people to be good people. And this is exempting stuff like, you know, like all the ritualistic stuff and all the get to God through me kind of stuff. Just to be a good human today is asking for more than most people can do. And that includes our candidates.
Mm.
Um, and I honestly find it kind of sad personally. But what can you do? It's not my place to make those decisions.
Yep.
But
And the reason why, honestly, like one of the reasons why the people in Jesus' time didn't like Jesus was political, because they were expecting this, at that point in time, who was the bad guy? The Romans. So they were expecting Jesus to come and topple the Roman government. Because at one point his disciples asked him, now do we topple them, Lord? Like now are we gonna take over? Are we gonna bring Jerusalem back? Like are we gonna topple the Romans and get them out of here? He's like, no, no, no. Jesus was like, no, 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 you're missing the point here. I'm not here to topple the Roman government. I'm here to bring my kingdom, which is a type of government. Uh, and that's when they were like, wait, I mean, if you're not going to topple the Roman government, then, that was one of the reasons why they crucified him, was political.
Mm. All right. We are at an hour and 13 minutes. We're about that time. We got through a little bit of Protestantism, a little bit of the in between, and a little bit of extra for you at the end. Um,
Yeah, we sure
it's
did.
the extra is always it's look, Nick,
we said,
the best thing in
yep,
life, happiness,
yeah,
is when you find extra French fries at the bottom of the bag.
absolutely,
I have a
absolutely.
brother.
It's actually when you find an onion ring within the French fry,
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
dude,
Oh
yes.
yes.
the
Didn't even
chicken
have to
nugget
pay for it. You got
or a
away with
chicken
so
nugget.
much.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, dude, straight up.
Who wants to close us out this time? I know I took over last time, but someone else
I
can
can
close us
close
out.
it out.
Okay.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to our spiel on Protestantism and Christianity as a whole. Um, I hope that what we said during this past hour is helpful. Once again, to quote Paul, scrutinize everything and retain what's good. So this has been podcast religious episode, or the religious section.
And let me
Mm-hmm.
Benny's our guest, so actually let me take it from here. Thank you. But I'm gonna take it from here and I'm gonna say this. If you need to find Nick is at twitch.tv/lore_king. Cast.
Ooh.
He's also on YouTube, which is youtube.com/lore-cast. It is awesome. And
Mm.
I'm a subscriber, obviously. If you need to find me, I am at beetlemilk.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Delta_GRN, Delta Green. And I'm out there hanging out, and it's all good. Benny, I don't know Benny's contact information.
I'll look it up real
Um,
quick. Hold
My social
on.
security number is
my credit card number is
didn't steal my
Oh,
uh,
yeah, it's Wise Mexican 94. That's Benny. I follow you.
yeah.
Wise Mexican 94. Rock on. Okay, so if you need to find any of us, you can find us there. Besides that, you notice that we have not outlined which one we're going to talk about next time. And
Yep.
the reason is because we had outlined last time and it kind of got derailed. We decided to do
Yeah,
something else.
absolutely.
So we're gonna come up with that independently, and then next week will be a surprise for all of you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being beautiful and wonderful, and we hope you all have an excellent, excellent, excellent night.
All right. Bye.